Happy Monday, everybody. James Hancock here, back to review the latest episode of Sharp Objects, an episode called Closer. I apologize for the extreme tardiness on this particular review. I was up until about 1 in the morning reviewing the season finale of Succession, and I guess it's a good problem to have when there's too much good stuff out there to review everything in a timely fashion. That's definitely preferable to the periods where I'm twiddling my thumbs and hoping for a movie or a show to get excited about. In any case, I hope nobody interpreted my tardiness as a sign of losing interest in the show. By the end of this year, I think most people will look back on Sharp Objects as the most fascinating thriller or whodunit all year. I love how it takes us to very dark places that ordinarily we would prefer not to go. I think the acting is first rate across the board. I love how the show is willing to take its time and set up a proper mood and atmosphere. And as we saw in episode 5, it really has a profound sense of time and place and setting. And I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to see a more unusual holiday celebrated on TV the rest of the year, because Calhoun Day is easily one of the strangest holidays ever conceived by a writer. Like, the first 23 years of my life were spent in Virginia and North Carolina, so I've known a lot of people who have a very intense, passionate pride in being Southern, who are obsessed with Southern history, are very obsessed with the Civil War. However, of all the cocktail parties that I've been to in the South, I've definitely never seen people dressed up as Union and Confederate soldiers getting absolutely trashed, especially one where the main event is reenacting this pretty horrific, brutal chapter from the Civil War, which I'll be getting into in my recap. But there's a moment in episode 5 which I think is going to go down as one of the most dangerous, but at the same time vulnerable moments in any show or movie we're going to see all year. And I'm of course talking about the moment where Camille Preaker exposes her full body to her mother and sister, and we really get to see for the first time the full extent of what she's done to herself over the last 15-20 years. In my 20 plus years as a rabid movie fanatic, I've definitely seen a lot of extreme cinema. I've sought out a lot of very provocative stories that a lot of people might find shocking, but I have to say that one particular moment, as the camera started cutting to different parts of her body, it about knocked me on my back. I was completely floored. And it was further evidence to me that in calendar year 2018, that TV is ready and willing to go to strange, dark places that would scare to death most filmmakers and most movie studios. In any case, let's dive into the recap of this episode. The main focus of this episode is Calhoun Day. It's the one day a year where Adora basically invites the entire community to her home. It appears as if pretty much every single person in the town is invited to come out, get completely trashed, hang out, talk about the Civil War, talk about history, and watch a little play. But what is adding additional tension to this year's Calhoun Day is the fact that Camille Preaker's latest article about the dead girls is kind of sort of gone viral. Her boss is thrilled by the level of traffic it's been generating, but in the town, it's become very divisive because some people are annoyed that they were cut out of the article. Some people are choosing to misinterpret what the article has said. And for a town that's already on edge, as far as the cops are concerned, this article might be the tipping point that pushes people from your regular, crazed, all-day drinking binge into some form of violent behavior. For me, one of the more interesting aspects of this episode was watching Amma trying to provoke and push Camille's buttons. As we've already seen, Amma loves nothing more than stirring the pot, causing trouble, getting people stirred up, and she very deliberately keeps bringing up the article that Camille wrote when she and Camille and their mother are going shopping for something other than the complete, total, all-black outfits that Camille usually wears. Adora's getting all upset. At one point, she even looks at her hands and blames the daughters and says, "You made me bleed." Of course, nothing is ever Adora's fault. But what's interesting is that Amma experiences what appears to be her first moment of regret. You could tell on some level that Amma's enjoying watching how much emotional distress Camille is going through trying on different outfits. And while she's in the changing room, they basically take away her normal clothes and they leave her with these very traditional, like, sundresses. The problem is that these sundresses, they have no sleeves, they come up above the knee. And as we come to see, basically every inch of Camille's body, except for her hands and her face, is basically covered with some form of self-abuse. Some of it's just random scar tissue. A lot of it's these very elaborate words. But it's almost like a member of like the Japanese Yakuza, where they basically have tattoos over every inch of their body. But finally, Camille's just had enough of the meddling of both her mother and her younger sister, and she just throws open the door and reveals everything to both of them. And it's the first time where we've seen Amma completely, totally shocked. Amma, like many self-centered people, probably doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about other people, but for the first time, she really comes to realize who her older sister might be. And we even see Adora express a little sympathy to Camille, which is definitely a first as far as this show is concerned. Because as we come to realize over the course of the episode, Adora sees too much of Camille's father and Camille. She won't really elaborate but so much, but she tells Camille that her father was cold and distant, and that's why she never loved her. I mean, it's a pretty brutal, frank, candid moment. And as I mentioned in my previous video, the show employs a really interesting editing style, but when Camille reveals herself to her family, we get these great cutaways to all these different parts of her body where we can really take in all the detail of what she's done to herself, but it has a massive impact on Amma and an absolutely unfathomable gesture of generosity. Amma successfully finds a dress that will cover Camille from head to toe, so Camille is actually able to participate in Calhoun Day as opposed to retreating back to St. Louis, as she seems prepared to do until Amma confronts her and basically begs her to stay. But as Camille fears, Calhoun Day turns out to be a total shit show. People get way too drunk. The grieving father of one of the murder victims tries to confront Willis at one point, and he very sternly says, "You don't want to be touching me." When he realizes that picking a fight with Willis is probably going to get him nowhere, he instead attacks John, who he blames for murdering his daughter. It's just a classic example of what happens when people drink heavily all day, starting early in the day on empty stomachs. But there's some great levity. At one point, Camille's walking by some of her old drinking buddies, and they say, "Hey, big city, where'd you learn to write like that? Certainly not around here." And I love her retort. She just says, "Where'd you learn to read like that? Certainly not around here." At one point, Adora offers to take Willis on the grand tour of her home, and she's describing how her wallpaper is hand-painted, and she's going into a level of detail that I seriously doubt Willis is really interested in hearing. But we also see that in her classic passive-aggressive fashion, Adora is trying to poison her daughter's reputation with Willis and sabotage their growing relationship. As if things weren't weird enough, Amma and her friend decide to take ecstasy before performing this play. And to sum up the gist of the play, Calhoun was fighting on the side of the Confederacy, but he had a very young bride from the North. Camille even describes him as a pedophile, but I don't think they mention specifically what their age disparity might have been. In any case, she was pregnant when a bunch of Union soldiers came down and tried to reclaim her and take her back north. When she resisted, they tied her to a tree, they raped and ravished and beat and tortured her within an inch of her life before setting the tree on fire. When Willis comments to Camille that it's a pretty unusual event to base a holiday upon, Camille very casually replies that in this area, there are not really that many nice stories to build a holiday upon. But during the performance of the play, we can see that Amma is completely trashed. Her pupils get insanely dilated. Whenever anything passes her vision, she's kind of like, ah. If you've ever experienced the effects of ecstasy, anything moving or anything with colors definitely attracts your attention, especially when they bring in the pretend fire to set the tree aflame. But all hell breaks loose during the attack on John. Amma completely freaks out, runs off into the woods, which prompts a complete and total meltdown by Adora, who's wailing and sobbing and screaming. Camille lets it slip that Amma actually has a second phone, but it ends up being Camille who finds Amma hiding in the shed out in the woods. That night, as Amma rests, we see a rare moment where Adora and Camille are kind of bonding, and Adora is very concerned about what's going to happen if Camille gets any closer to Willis, and at a certain point, as they get closer, he's going to see what's happened to Camille's body. Camille basically tells her mother that she never allows her relationships with men to get to that point. But it's when Adora tells Camille that she's never loved her that it actually provokes Camille to seek out Willis in the rain in his hotel room, and they have a pretty intense sexual encounter. Initially, it's just Willis and Camille kind of doing this mutual masturbation thing, watching each other. But finally, Camille turns out the lights and says they're going to have sex, but it's got to be her way in a very specific position. And as the episode draws to a close, we see that closer is actually one of the words carved on her skin. I love how so many episodes end with a close-up of one of the words that's on her body. I feel like it's a great disturbing motif that ties so many of the episodes together. And in any event, the teaser for episode 6 suggests that things are going to intensify in very surprising and dramatic ways. And sadly, we are actually in the final stages of this show. Only 3 episodes to go. And I can safely say that I'm going to miss this show desperately once it officially draws to a close. But thanks so much for watching my recap and review. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy talking with my fellow Sharp Object fans on a weekly basis. And once again, I do apologize for my tardiness on this review, but if you want to talk more, you can always hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax. That's always the best place to reach me, or you can just leave a comment in the comments below. But please consider subscribing to my channel, and I'll be back at y'all later on tonight to review the season 4 premiere of Better Call Saul. But thanks so much for watching. Onwards and upwards.